Good morning, Lubaina. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Good. Well, thanks so much for joining me this morning. I really appreciate it. I know you're so busy with your Tate Modern show that's opening later this year. So thanks for taking some time out. So our conversation today is taking place against the backdrop of Grundy Art Gallery's 110th birthday year. It was set up in 1911 to show the best art of the day, and it owes its existence to two local artist brothers, John and Cuthbert Grundy, whose gift of £2,000 and a donation of over 30 paintings provided the starting point for the gallery and the collection. And in the intervening 110 years, the Grundy Art Gallery collection has grown to over 2,000 items. And in this birthday year, what we want to do is look at some of the stories behind those works and the artists who have made those works in this series called Collection Conversations. So you're the first in the series, and it feels really apt because your work, Crown, that we're going to have a look at, is the most recent acquisition into our collection. And so if I can, I should be able to share this image. So can you see the image, Lubaina?
Yes, I can.
Brilliant.
Yeah,
so we're going to be highlighting Crown as part of our current online exhibition, Collection Spotlight Portraits. And I just wondered, can you tell me just a bit of background about the work? Who's the subject and what's the story of the piece?
Well, it's kind of strange. I made the piece while I was making several other things. I quite often have several projects on the go at once. So I made the piece in St. Ives in an enormous studio, which used to be Ben Nicholson's studio, where I was making a big piece called Old Boat, New Money for my show at the New Museum in New York. So I was making that, but while I'm making sort of big project there, I need to do something else as well, just to take the heat off myself. So I also was making a series called Metal Handkerchiefs, which are all about objects and health and safety texts and kind of a funny reading of those. But I wanted to make, and I made those on metal, but I wanted to make something, a whole series of things eventually on canvas about something I'm very concerned with, which is sort of broken objects, broken things. I'm of an age where I sort of used to be surrounded by things that broke and somebody mended them. Chairs broke, tables broke, or electrical goods broke, and you got someone to mend them. You didn't throw them away. And so I made this series of paperworks where there are African figures with broken objects, with things that are sort of slightly dysfunctional, which perhaps were one thing and then were another. Sort of, if you like, the objects are then in conversation with those people, because usually in my paintings there isn't just one person, but in a sense the object, this kind of broken or dysfunctional object, is in conversation with the person. So with Crown, this is one of the paintings in this series, the person is experiencing that thing that Africans in other places than Ghana or Kenya, wherever they come from originally, where their families originate, is in a place where they are, if you like, identified as Black, whereas if they were in the place where their family comes from, where their ancestors come from, they would be defined by their name or their family and not defined by being Black. You're kind of only Black when you're in a place where you're one of very few. So this figure, I think, is in a place where actually they are some ordinary person on the street, but the crown is a pub sign and kind of is saying, I think, actually remember that where you really belong, you are actually someone, something, someone recognizable, someone to be treated with dignity, I suppose. But this kind of broken pub sign is sort of like a talisman, like sort of a chance encounter with this person, reminding them that to remember who they are, to remember who they really are. So yeah, it's a sort of a double portrait in a way. And you know, it takes, as I say, it has a conversation with other works that I have that have these kind of broken items in them. It has a conversation with my absolute, I don't know, passion and sort of obsession with the possibility of having a chance encounter with a piece of art in a public place. And I think that pub signs and shop signs, you know, for hundreds of years in Britain have been that thing for hundreds of years everywhere, all over the world. You know, someone's designed that thing. In many places still, somebody painted it yesterday, put 2 holes, you know, in the top corners and hung it up, and it's the sign for a hairdresser or a hardware shop or, you know, something ordinary and everyday. So I'm incorporating a few of the different sorts of conversations I have into one piece here. Yeah, I think that's kind of how it came about.
And you mentioned there something which I just wanted to talk a little bit about. We're living in extraordinary times. I think I'll just stop sharing this image now so that we can see each other. We're, you know, living through extraordinary times. The Black Lives Matter movement that sort of swept the world last year. As we sit here in 1st of February 2021, we're in the midst of a global pandemic which has brought, you know, devastation to so many people's lives. And I'm really conscious of that work there is a focus at the minute within museums and galleries, which is about redressing the underrepresentation of missing voices in collections and in museums and galleries activity. And I just wondered, all of those things which provide the context to our conversation now, how and if that is impacting on your work right now as an artist.
Well, I suppose the thing is that certainly these 2 big global events impacted on me the same way really as they impacted on most people's lives, you know. I mean, Black lives have always mattered to me in a sense. So I am a little bit cynical and you know, mistrust some of this kind of reaction, you know, because Black lives have mattered before in the 1980s to galleries and museums. And then something else came along that was sexier, and Black lives didn't matter anymore. You know, that's sort of the trouble in a sense. But you know, and I suppose COVID, the onset of COVID, you know, in spring, whatever it was, of 2020, meant in a kind of good way that I had time to grieve over the death of my mother. So it allowed me to be on my own, to make work all day and not actually have to deal with too many people. You know, I would go out walking, you know, 5-6 kilometers or whatever around the park and the nature reserve. And the only people I was communicating with were the artists that I know very well and are my friends here. And they are the people that sort of helped me get through that. But that's the same as so many other million people, you know, across the world. So in a sense, those two sort of catastrophic and, I mean, catastrophic, Black Lives Matter being catastrophic in that everybody realized what many of us knew. Those 2 events yeah, had a great effect on me, but only in a way to confirm who I am and what's important to me, and sort of to emphasize one of the most important things that I kind of have to keep telling myself is to just keep going.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I worked the whole time. None of it really sort of stopped me working, making small things, making big projects even. I mean, I have 2 studios, so that helped. So I could go, you know, sort of 10 minutes from each other. I could stay in my studio here at home, or I could go to my studio in the middle of town, because it's a big complex, and we have studios that are very separate from each other, you know, so that kind of mixing wasn't, in real life, wasn't necessary. So the keeping going is how I managed to, and am managing to keep sane, I suppose. Yeah, but yeah, with the political sort of situation, I just hope that museums and galleries especially can build on this.
Yeah.
You know, and rather than think a knee-jerk reaction, this is what we must do now, and then, you know, next year it'll be something else. Next year it will be something else, but we have to just keep building and building, you know, rather than building up and dropping.
And I think that, so you do make important work that tells important stories, and you draw attention to missing voices and overlooked histories, and you've been pivotal in the Black Arts movement since the 1980s. And those are just some of the reasons why Grundy Art Gallery is so pleased to have your work now in our collection. But I think something that my colleague at the Grundy said the other day was, but you're also a Turner Prize winner who lives down the road. And that is also really important. The fact that you have maintained a base in the Northwest, and that you feel, through how I hear about you and the work that you do, you feel very committed to the Northwest. And so in a way, so we've talked a little bit about how you identify and what is your identity as an artist, but is that also part of it? And is that important to you, the fact that you are based here in the region?
I think well, it's important. I mean, my mother was born in Farnworth near Bolton, you know, 90 odd years ago. So to some degree, I belong here anyway. But, you know, she went to London when she was a young woman and vowed never to come back. But she did come back when she was very, very old. And I guess I'm based here for all kinds of sort of historical reasons. I felt comfortable up in the north of England, having lived 30 odd years in, you know, in London and gone to Royal College of Art and all that, because I knew it, and I knew it wasn't some desperate alien place. But 30 years ago, that was still quite a decision to make. But no one was giving me work in London 30 years ago, nobody. And so Rochdale Art Gallery had the people there, Jill Morgan there, wanted to give me an opportunity to kind of expand on curating, which she'd seen the shows that I'd made in London in the 1980s, and wanted to know if I wanted to work with her, and so gave me a job at Rochdale Art Gallery. And that's how I sort of came up here, if you like. But, you know, I did that for a few years, but I found that I really loved doing the teaching that I had done on and off, you know, in that kind of part-time way all over the country. When I lived in London, when I was in London, I still didn't teach in London art schools because they simply were not employing Black artists to do that work. But, you know, art schools, art departments in Nottingham and Sheffield and Newcastle and Manchester and Bradford were keen. And so when a job came up at what's now UCLan, I was interested in. I wanted to help artists go from sort of day one to, you know, 3 years later, to actually kind of develop their practice and get them to ask some of the right sort of questions. So the place, the house, the studio, its proximity to where I was working, you know, So my studio in my house was maybe 500 meters from the front door of the art school. Well, there's nothing better than that if you're an artist. I was making work always before I left for work. In 30 years ago, there was such thing as a lunchtime. So I'd make work at lunchtime. And then 30 years ago also, you'd leave about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So I was making work until it went dark. So I had none of that commuting. My making was part of my teaching. My teaching was part of my making. It was just one, you know, a whole 7-day activity.
Yeah.
And that it's hard to sort of leave that, you know. It's certainly hard to replace that. And as the years went by, of course, I met and became really good friends with a lot of incredibly brilliant artists, and we've helped each other. You know, they've helped me understand all kinds of things about different ways of making, different issues to make work about. We've traveled together, we've collaborated on pieces together, and I guess it would be, I mean, people always say this, but it's the people as well as the place that make it important. You know, but my studio team is here, my workshops, my store, everything is here. Why would I move it, really? You know?
And I mean, in that, when you mentioned there the importance to you of being part of a sort of a support mechanism for other artists as well, you know, you when you talk about your work in teaching and that sense of wanting to be part of a solution which helps artists to grow their creativity and grow their careers. And I just wanted to ask you a final question. It's a bit of a big question to leave until the last minute, but I do a lot of work with emerging artists as well, and mentoring and sharing my own knowledge and learning from them at the same time. And I know that you're a great supporter of artists, particularly emerging artists in the Northwest region. And you've just mentioned some of that there. And I suppose I do get asked quite a lot of the time about how do artists grow their career? How do they build what they love doing into some form of making a living from it? And I know it's a massive subject, but have you got any, I suppose, advice for young artists? I know this is against the backdrop of the current pandemic, where much of the infrastructure that artists use has sort of grown to a halt, but I suppose if we could just leave it on a bit of advice or information for emerging artists out there.
Yeah, I mean, I've got plenty, but I think one important thing is that curators need to get out there. Yeah, it's difficult, but there is such a thing as Zoom. I think curators need to take responsibility for communicating with artists. Don't wait for them to come to you, because actually some of the time the wrong ones come to you. You know, the ones that are interested in strategy are not interested in making good work. And I think the term emerging is good. I mean, you know, it's better than the term young, but I think there's been a real crime committed in the Northwest in terms of artists many of whom I work with, who are making absolutely brilliant experimental work, but in the region, they're treated as nothing. So they can be showing in London, in Vienna, in New York, making really interesting work, and yet it's not shared with the region. So I think I have to say that I think that's very, very important, and I find that most disconcerting. In terms of emerging artists, well, I think you have to work every day. You have to be ready, because those curators will find you, but you have to be ready. Seeking them out doesn't really work, because we know why. You have to look at art, you have to look at what other people are making as much as possible, but also communicate with other artists, with music people, with writers, with thinkers, with historians, with scientists. You know, have conversations that are about the issues, the subjects, even the colors. If you're interested in color and light and not some big political issue, then communicate with people who are interested in the chemistry of color or the physics of light, you know, because that kind of builds your world. And I think if you're living in a region that is not the London region, sometimes, although the region is enormous, it feels small. Yeah. But in fact, you need to build your own, if you like, your own region and have those big conversations. And I guess you have to help other artists wherever you can. Yeah. So if you know how to build something, but they know how to do something with a website, then swap the skill. Yeah. Because in a sense, in the end, you have to build your own infrastructures and networks, because the system is not always ready or willing or brave enough to help you when you need it. But you have to be ready for when those connections can be made. I think that's a really brilliant point to end on, that idea of building your own region. I really like that as an idea, and of course it makes sense. And I think that's what we've done here in Preston. You know, we have great facilities like the print room at UCLan. We have absolutely brilliant master printmakers. They don't like to be called that because they're women, so we haven't got a proper term for it. But you know, sound artists, artists interested in the environment, artists interested in archive, in the cities. You know, there's a whole range, a rich range of artists. And all of us are here having these sorts of conversations and taking it out there. But we could enrich the region even more. Yeah. With a bit more conversation, you know. Yeah. So we just need to do, you know, people need to come from Manchester and Liverpool rather than thinking that places like Preston are not worth visiting. Yeah. There are really sensational artists over here, and you know, people need to know that. Yeah. The trouble is that people in Berlin and Vienna know that. Yeah. But people in Manchester and Liverpool don't. Well, I'll do what I can, Lubaina, in my role here at Grundy Art Gallery. And I just want to thank you again so much. I really appreciate the time, and it's been really lovely talking to you. Have a good day. Are you going back into your studio now? Or I mean, are you going back to work now? Yeah? Yeah, so yeah. I had to work now. Thanks so much. Okay, thank you very much. I'll keep in touch. All right. Thank you, Lubaina. Bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.